So we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Chuck. I'm the regional manager of the Defense Department and Intelligence Community here at Dragos. And welcome to the first Dragos Federal webinar, navigating the 2022 National Defense Authorization Act, kind of focused on what it means for operational technology and industrial control systems. I'll be moderating today. And before we jump into the discussion with our panelists, I do have a couple of housekeeping rules to go over and a few reminders. First, the session is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be sent out after the webinar for anybody who may have missed it. Everybody's lines have been muted, but we definitely still want you to interact with us. So feel free to use the question and answer function down below in your Zoom window to submit any questions that you may have, and we'll try to get them all to you we'll try to get to all of them at the end of the session. If you have any webinar technical issues, please feel free to use the chat. April Downey is monitoring that, and she'll help you address anything you may have. Finally, we'll end our discussion around 12:40 plus or minus and try to transition over to a brief question and answer session. So before we jump into our discussion on the NDAA, I'd like to introduce our guest. Really excited to have with us today Daryl Hagley, who is the Director, Mission Assurance and Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity for the United States Department of Defense, and Mr. Dave Forbes, Defense OT ICS Cybersecurity Leader for Booz Allen Hamilton's Industrial Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Engineering Practice. I'll pass the mic first over to Daryl to talk a little bit about himself and what he's been up to lately, and then we'll have him hand the mic over to Dave. Daryl?
Thanks, Chuck, and thanks to Dragos for putting on this webinar. I'm excited to see all the number of folks that are here and wanting to learn more about the advancing control system cybersecurity. I've been trying to do this for the last 10 years. Work now in the Office of Secretary of Defense and the Office of the Principal Cyber Advisor's Office, and trying to promote mission assurance and securing these control systems that support not only just the building systems, but the fuel manufacturing, weapon systems, new chem bio, anything that the military forces need to project power and be successful in a cyber contested environment. Thanks.
Awesome. Dave?
Hey, Chuck, thank you very much. And thanks to Dragos for starting up this federal webinar series and including me. It's really an exciting and important time to be having this conversation. Building off the quick introduction, at Booz Allen, I really feel like I spend most of my time interacting with industry partners and clients to think about what solutions are needed in today's environment. I really come at it from the lens of protecting critical infrastructure. Obviously Booz Allen brings a range of different capabilities to this, thinking about the mission and how do we serve as a mission integrator, protecting our critical infrastructure across the country and around the world. So these topics really require collaboration. And I think we're at an unprecedented time where we need to get together, compare notes, put our heads together, and think about the best solutions for the way forward. So really happy to be part of this discussion and learn from all of you.
Awesome. Thanks. And every time I hear the words unprecedented times, I just keep thinking to myself, I'm kind of tired of living in unprecedented times. Seems like we've been doing that for the past couple of years, and especially now in the space that we're in. You're exactly right. We're seeing more activity and more threats that are out there than I think we've seen in years past. Adversary capabilities continue to increase, as do everything connected, right? Which is why I think it's great that in the 2022 NDAA, Congress really called out operational technology strongly, and they did it in not just one section, but four, kind of critical sections of the act. The first one, obviously, Section 1505. I kind of like to kid that it's all the OT things section. Everything from workforce to defensible architectures to sensing and monitoring, all kind of wrapped up into one, and then a special tag focus to the mission assurance community and the work that Daryl and others have been doing, focused around defense critical and task critical assets. I think it was great to see that. Section 1512, I thought was really interesting. Also, DoD support to commercially owned critical infrastructure. Talk a little bit about that one too. Section 1528, of course, we can't do anything nowadays without a reference to zero trust in there, right? And then finally, Section 1541, kind of talking about governance and evaluation of kind of how we're doing things and who's doing and who's responsible what. So to kind of kick things off, and we'll just kind of bounce between each other, kind of conversational wise. Daryl, what was your first impression when you saw this year's NDAA, and particularly Section 1505?
Well, it was really great to see so many things being addressed, and talking about, let's get focused on our most critical assets that we need in the mission. And right off the bat, the SecDef is supposed to come up and articulate how much money we are investing and show Congress that how much money we are investing in here. As many folks in this space have known, how much money for control system cybersecurity is really paled in comparison to traditional IT cybersecurity investments. So, that was pretty amazing to see. I want you to show me the money, right? Show me how much you're really putting toward getting at these now easy targets that you mentioned in the beginning that we're just seeing being exploited. The other thing is it really called out for the Chief Information Officer to really show implementation and address any challenges, any things that need to be changed in policy for implementation. A lot of folks in this space have been trying to partner with the CIO and those teams, and a lot of times there'll be some pushback saying, hey, we've given you the policy, just go get it done. But there has been some challenges in making implementation come through and being measured. So I think those are the two really key things that struck me. I guess one other is it also called out for all the different stakeholders to brief at the same time. Normally, sometimes they'll say, SecDef, go do this and give us a brief. This one called out specifically that representatives from the services, U.S. Cyber Command, Joint Staff representing the COCOMs, the services, CIO, all need to provide this presentation or update to this specifically. Now, they can all go at one time or they can go separately, but I think that also really shows that, hey, we just don't want it from one angle. We want all the different stakeholders to come and tell us where they stand on mapping the most critical things to their missions and securing the operational technology control systems in which they depend upon.
Awesome, thanks. And I know that you were involved in kind of supporting some of these efforts and everything. And from the community standpoint, really thank you for everything that you've done to kind of advance the state and awareness of control system cyber within the community. It's critically important, and you've definitely been a key player in all of this, right? From start to finish.
Well, thanks, but I knew nothing about any of this stuff 10 years ago as I was coming up on that 10-year anniversary, and it's really taken industry, other government agencies, all to come together and really promote and get to the success what we have today. So, but thanks.
Absolutely. Dave, what about you? First impressions when you kind of sat down and started digging through the NDAA?
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. When I first sat down, my initial reaction was, similar to Daryl's. It's great to see this high level engagement and this leadership emphasis on OT within the NDAA. And making this a priority and issuing guidance. As you know, Chuck, in our conversations, I'm really going to look at this pragmatically from the services perspective. And, how is this going to impact those service level CIOs and action officers that are going to be dealing with these guidelines, right? So, the 1505 kind of reins it all in, right? It starts to formalize a lot of things that DoD has been trying to get at. Puts a fine point on what they want and who they want it from. Kind of building off of what Daryl said, when you see this and how the guidance directs the CIO to establish policies and architectures, I kind of get a sense culturally it starts to not just mitigate the problem, but think about how to manage where we go. It's a little bit of an enduring, making this a permanent issue for us to deal with. But I'll also offer to you my other reaction, which was there's a lot here. There's a lot here, and there's a big challenge that's going to cascade down to the services.
How do we measure progress? How do you define what relevant is? This is going to require clearly defined roles at all levels, which is going to take time and resources. So this is needed, but it's going to be requiring a lot of, there's a lot involved. You know, one of the other things that I pulled away from the initial reading was this immediate emphasis on, you know, this is predicated upon mission relevant terrain in cyberspace and understanding it and defining it, okay? Well, that requires mission decomposition. And mission decomposition is a pretty resource intensive exercise. It takes time, it takes expertise. So these are all the right things, but we immediately need to understand what's involved in doing it all to meet these timelines and who the players are and make sure we have the right players in place.
Thanks, Dave. So there's a couple of threads I want to pull from there. You mentioned in particular, it's not just a one-time requirement that the NDAA represents. It is a long-term programmatic approach that Congress is instructing the DoD to do, and that requires governance and requires management. Daryl, kind of from your perspective, what are some of the important governance considerations that are in the NDAA, and where do you think that we should kind of focus from a who should be doing what within the department to get after the requirements?
So thanks. I'll adjust that in just a second, but I want for some folks in the audience who may not exactly say, well, I'm not in DoD, I'm in another agency. You can adopt this same kind of language to what you should be tracking, right? What is mission relevant terrain in being able to make to achieve your objectives in the Department of Energy, Transportation, EPA, doesn't matter. You can still kind of interpret that. But it does say, by 2023, SecDef, I want briefs on what progress you're making and establish a governance process to formally look at where you get from the people, processes, and technology and funding. It also has CIO to do this initial evaluation to also look at, well, what governance bodies are in place right now, because there's plenty of IT bodies. There's a military CIO meeting every month, right? How often do you think they're talking about this stuff? Well, so now we need to integrate that into these conversations and into that formal structure. There has been a structure in place for a process to identify what is important. But what Dave was getting to, which I think is very key, is the people who do that. Is it the system engineer? Do they know what they're working on, how important that is to the mission? And the mission planners, have they included that mission engineer and the IT people to figure out, where some of those dependencies are? And then, for those systems that are off base, and I know many companies that are utilities that are off base providing services, they want to communicate about how they're protecting and what they should do, and they're asking for best practices. And yes, of course, there are some that say, no, you're not looking at mine, I've got it, don't worry. But those I've talked to, many of them are willing partners to try and figure out how to best secure them. And we've got already plenty of policy and direction that says, installation commanders, go make those communication ties with those people who are supporting you outside the base and figure out how to best secure it. Work with the IT and the OT people, bring them together. There's even a warfare publication, it's unclassified, on how to map terrain in cyberspace. And when we go and do assessments, that's one of the things that we spend time on. Your experts get in there. They said this is what takes more time than anything else, is to map, because these mappings are not done. So I look forward to seeing the responses from the services and seeing exactly what they need to implement this. But this is not just a DoD issue. I've heard this, in industry and the other government agencies as well, is we need to determine what's important and how critical these OT systems are, and make whatever changes from governance to processes and investments.
Awesome. Yeah. So you mentioned, and Dave, you also mentioned kind of the mapping of key cyber terrain. Alongside that comes, inventory, asset management, right? Some of those kind of fundamental practices that we need to do everything from basic cybersecurity all the way up to start enabling kind of zero trust. Dave, from your end, what do you think folks can do to shorten the flash to bang to accurately map and accurately inventory their environments?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that the majority of users out there now do not have visibility of their assets, right? So, I mean, you could look at a couple different studies where upwards to 85% of owners don't have a near complete asset inventory, right? So when we look at what 1505 is asking us to do, and our desire to keep the mission momentum in place, well, first of all, you want to prioritize your crown jewels, right? You want to make sure that you understand what it is most important to you to inventory. Asset inventories are not just a manual process, but asset inventories are a living, enduring thing. You have to have investment in the right technology, and the use of the right technology can save time and labor. It's just not a matter of clicking a couple of buttons, but you have to have a plan in place that focuses on passive approaches, passive tools to make sure that you're taking smart choices, making smart choices towards looking at your inventory. Some of the things that you need to do include, aggregating your various data sources. What can you get off of the network? Network logs, using a SIM that allows for passive data collection. One of the themes that I want to underscore here, Chuck, is that there are fundamental things that you can be doing now. And as we look at kind of the challenge in front of us, starting with a good asset inventory, there are fundamental things that you can be low-hanging fruit that organizations need to be looking at now. And it really starts with understanding the priorities, understanding what needs to be inventoried, and what tools that you need to do that in a passive environment to get things off and running.
Yeah, so I think that you hit on something that's really important, right? The inventory and the mapping not being just a one-time process, but being kind of a living document, right? Something that is constantly being updated, and hopefully not by hand, but through technology. Daryl, the department just released a continuous ATO, kind of memo focused on building out these processes to continuously authorize our various systems. Do you think that this could kind of help us get operational technology into a continuous ATO space and actually help with accreditation of systems?
Yeah, I think that's a great good start, and that's a key fundamental part of zero trust, is to be able to continue to monitor and to minimize cross access for folks to get from people who just don't have the need to know or should not have access. Once they get in that perimeter, they're limited on where they should go. So I think that continuous monitoring requirement that it's always been in RMF, but now it's supposed to help accelerate a little bit. And again, to just put it out there as this is where we want to go. We do need to see more solutions in place doing it. I think a couple key parts is we still have to designate who is in charge of figuring out where that inventory is. Is that the system owners and operators, or are we now going to ask the cyber people to do that? And what's the situational awareness that gets up each level of chain of command? What's been helpful is contract language when you build new buildings now has included cybersecurity systems, and even includes that you must have the ability for continuous monitoring. But we still need to have some of the more refined specifics on what, depending upon the criticality of this system, are we just going with the lowest level controls, or moderate or high level? And a lot of times the folks who are in charge of these systems or running the systems operationally may not know that this HVAC system needs to have a high level of security controls applied because of how critical it is to the mission. So I think as we continue to progress and as we collect data to answer these, I think we're going to discover some of the areas, gaps, and get to those.
And Chuck, if I might squeeze in another thought, because I want to make sure we don't miss this, and Daryl touched on it as well, and that's how we are using tools to do this. I want to make sure that we understand that the pitfall that we have is that, tool proliferation can happen when tools aren't aggregated or integrated cohesively. And what we got to be careful about is having too many tools out there and not a holistic approach. So I mentioned up front that I really wanted to look at this from the services perspective. And I hope that 1505 pushes us to continue to integrate and share ideas. The system integration involved in ensuring that we're using the right tools and the right solution in an integrated fashion is going to help us be able to do things like expedite inventories and make ATOs go faster. If everyone kind of goes off and does their own thing, it's going to make things slower and create more roadblocks. So I just want to hit that point because I think it's important.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's a couple of great things that come out of 1505 that really touch on this, and one of those around the monitoring and kind of the continuous nature of that. 1505 says that continuous sensing, not just monitoring, is required of assets. And I've been, for many of you guys who know me in the community, I've worked both on the National Guard side of the house and on the Dragos side of the house. And you sometimes go into environments and you see that the definition of continuous is, hey, look, we're going to go in and patch and scan every 6 months. I think 1505 advances the ball and really clarifies what continuous monitoring means within the control system community. And that means that these assets and these networks need to be sensed. We need the ability to detect adversaries trying to target the lower levels of the control systems, right? The communications between controllers, human machine interfaces, and engineering workstations, so that we can really get after how adversaries are targeting and have demonstrated capability to make impacts within control system networks. So you're looking at that. The 1505 talks about architectures, right? Daryl, you mentioned Annex D for Daryl earlier. That's coming out into the DoD CIO cybersecurity reference architecture. What do you think are some of the important architectural requirements for folks that are either in the process of acquiring a new control system or looking at a critical control system to evaluate how they may deploy sensors and actually better defend those assets?
Well, right. So yeah, the basis is pretty straightforward on the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? Identify, detect, respond, recover. And for those who are familiar with the DoD's more situational awareness and control systems, that joint capability demonstration that finalized last year kind of set that framework in place and left like kind of an open architecture to where you can functionally do each of those, but it also added communication so that you're able to communicate amongst some of these other functional areas. And so you have any of these 7 functional areas. If you're one vendor and do one functional area, you can be integrated. Or if you're one vendor and you have 7, or if you have 7 vendors, you all can contribute to this kind of open architecture that has been proven to be secure. Now, obviously, that is as of 2021, and these will continue to evolve. But at least, we're putting kind of what the baseline measure of success is, and that's, to your point, that's 1505 says we need sensors in place, and these are going to be U.S. Cyber Command's responsibility to ensure that the right sensors are in place, the right processes are being implemented. The other thing that I think was fascinating was Cybercom's going to be in charge of making sure folks are trained, that there are joint training areas for control systems. And probably most of the people here attending this webinar know of several that are out there and recognize they're all underutilized. So how do we get more of them used to get the most out of them, and to get situational awareness on what we need to do and where these investments need to be?
Yeah, and I'm really excited. Next month's webinar is going to be focused on OT cybersecurity workforce and what that might look like across the federal government. I think it's absolutely a critical topic for everybody to be looking at right now, because it takes a long time to grow folks that understand the engineering and the process side of these control systems, which you have to know in order to be able to effectively defend and also respond to incidents. So really excited to see the language about having a dedicated OT cybersecurity workforce, as well as specifying that folks have to be located at the installation level. That was probably, out of everything in the entire Authorization Act, that was one of the most exciting things for me.
And if I may add, so that's one of the great things that the Mosaics framework does, is it automates some of those techniques and procedures that personnel would do into that framework. So there is a certain amount that the system owners and operators would need to know. There's a certain amount that the cyber folks would need to know. And there are some, and like you're saying earlier, we need to let the technology do as much for us as possible. Absolutely.
Definitely. Dave, when we're talking about technology and we're talking about, control systems in general, you and I have spoken multiple times about the amount of data that's available both in the process space and hopefully will soon be available in the cybersecurity space. What are your thoughts around how we integrate data coming from these disparate portions of the environment, from different installations, from different services? How do we integrate that into a view that folks at the national strategic level can make use of?
Well, I think that's an important next step that has to be addressed. I mean, 1505 does a good job of directing DoD, CIO to establish chain policies, standards from RMF, and create architectures, which we've talked about. But it's very foundational, right? So it's going to be incumbent upon the next discussion to talk about data. And one of the things that comes to mind is the relationship between IT and OT data, and you and I have talked about this, and IT and OT data transfer is really all about cost benefit. And there is a lot of value in pulling your OT data to the IT side for analysis and monitoring. But that also increases risks, right? So getting at your question, we need to be able to further develop the tools that we have now and the tools that are to come to maximize the amount of data, to make sure that we facilitate that IT and OT data interface and data transfer and recognize the risk that goes with it. There is a lot of ways that we can transfer data securely using firewalls, DMZs, data diodes, and so on, but this is going to require future investment. I think at the end of the day, you have guidance and emphasis in 1505 that needs to translate into organizations recognizing that there are steps that can be taken now. And all of these things are going to require creativity, teamwork, and investment, and budget at the end of the day. I'm not this big believer that, you can't start this afternoon doing these kinds of things that we're talking about here. But we do need to recognize the reality that to get to where we want to go, there are increased risks involved that are going to require innovative technologies that will require investment. This is all going to go back to industry, government, academic partnership to get to those right solutions.
Yeah, I think the discussions around how we integrate operational technology data and IT data and what should be integrated, right, is really important to the overall discussion. You can't just throw IT indicators on top of an OT network and expect to get value, to be honest. Adversaries look at OT networks and OT network spaces differently, especially when we get down to, kind of the supervisory system components and below, kind of that layer 3 of the Purdue model. For those of you guys who are familiar with that architecture, I think it's important to realize that you've got to take an approach that acknowledges the difference and the uniqueness of operational technology environments. And when I'm talking OT, I'm not just talking about the systems that we immediately think of, right? Energy management, water treatment, weapon systems to a certain degree are also operational technology. They use a lot of the same or similar protocols, some of the same architectures. So we've got to, kind of blend these requirements across, both the A&S space as well as the CIO space, depending on, whose bucket and what type of system it is. So that, if we're an installation and maybe our facility team has a responsibility to support certain mission sets and certain mission owners, they have general principles that apply across the board. And I think I'm really excited to see the reference architecture come out, because it does contain those requirements, and they are actually implementable depending on the type of asset, its age, and resources that are available. So that's really exciting. Dave, one of the things that you kind of brought up a second ago, you talked about starting from a place and then moving on from a capability and increasing your ability to do certain things through both technology and people. And that ties into a bigger conversation around maturity within the space. This is one that I think anybody, again, within the DoD and commercial industry can kind of take to heart. Not everybody is as mature as others. Some people are just in different spots in their journey. That's not right. That's not wrong. That's just reality. And so we've got to kind of meet people where we are, especially us as cybersecurity professionals. We can't just go in and dictate, you must do this right now. We've got to coach and mentor, right? Especially in this space, because it's so complex. And that maturity concept, I think, ties into the discussion around zero trust. So, we're still in some places doing inventories on spreadsheets. Daryl and Dave, I'd love to kind of hear y'all's thoughts on what should we be doing to enable zero trust in the future? What should or shouldn't we be focused on? What do you guys think about that?
Well, if I can, I've already seen some solutions that show being able to apply zero trust fundamentals in the OT environment. That's one of the fantastic things, is there's no shortage of innovation. Once there's a set of requirements that are put out there. To be able to compartmentalize who has access to what is pretty straightforward. I think, in a lot of annual reports that we've seen, we just have not done that. We've given all the engineers one password that's written down, and we share it all, right? So there's a couple of easy things you can do to limit who has access to what. And you could easily make, two-factor authentication. There are a number of things you can do. I think what we need to have are the places to where you can verify that zero trust principles or capability is being enacted. We need cyber range capabilities in government, commercial, and academic environments. To be able to kind of verify, this is what the vendor says it can do, and then we need to have realistic environments for those, not only just to verify systems, but for training. And that is also mentioned here in 1505, is that Cybercom needs to come up with showing ways to develop tradecraft for offensive OT defensive tradecraft. So that's what I'm excited to see, again, the wide swath of things that are being outlined here in 1505.
Thanks, Daryl. So I'm actually, in the interest of time, we're kind of getting close to that 12:40 mark. I want to kind of end the discussion, and we'll pivot over into the Q&A. Just touching really quick on section 1512, which talks about DoD support to commercial infrastructure. This presents, in my opinion, a huge opportunity to partner with commercial industry, and not just partner to help protect infrastructure, but also to gain and gather information about best practices, about the way that people are utilized, their work roles, and everything else in that kind of spectrum. Dave, if you were sitting at an installation, right, what would you be doing to build a partnership with the local infrastructure community?
Yeah, so I think this is really important, and what I like about the OT world that we're in is we all come at it from different perspectives, and this is a perspective that I live in the role that I play. At the installation, you need to reach out to your industry partners who have integrated relationships across the government and across the commercial space. Within the OT environment, when you look specifically at the control systems that are at the installation, you're seeing many of the control systems, many of the devices, almost down to the exact ones. When you look at the Purdue model, there's so many similarities. The missions are different, but the similarities, the challenges, and the weaknesses are very much the same. If I were a civil engineer at an installation, I would build a team, a small team of people who had the access, relationships, and reach to pull in people who have these experiences in other companies. I mean, there isn't an installation across most of the services where there aren't nearby utility companies, other infrastructure, manufacturing companies that are frankly very eager and willing to have conversations about lessons learned. We do spend a lot of time at Booz Allen trying to do this because we recognize the importance of sharing stories and experiences across the commercial and defense space. I mean, Chuck, you and I have talked about this. The fact of the matter is, in the commercial environment, they're well ahead of in terms of dealing with these problems, tackling challenges, coming up with solutions. DoD and the government and the challenges that we face, it's pretty urgent right now. But we need to accelerate our ability to collaborate with commercial. And I'm talking roundtables, whiteboard sessions. People want to help the Department of Defense because it's an important mission for all of us. So we need to take the steps to pull people in and compare notes.
So I think that one way to address that, folks are sometimes hesitant to engage private industry, especially the vendor community, from a legal perspective, right? The DoD has creatives for a reason. Cooperative research and development agreements. I think this is a great space where folks could actually look at using the CRADA construct to build safe pathways for knowledge transfer to industry. And then I'll pass the mic over to Daryl with one final thought on this. I think it would be a great idea for the Defense Department to look at creating a civilian advisory board, similar to like the Army Science Board and other entities at that level, that the DoD could use as a reach back capability for knowledge transfer, for advice, and not just at the high levels, not just at strategic levels. Make that access all the way down to the installation level where folks feel free to engage folks to help kind of again capture those industry best practices, get multiple perspectives, and that should include everybody from infrastructure owner operators to the OT vendor community like the OEMs, Honeywells of the world, SELs and others, to the cybersecurity vendor community, folks like Dragos, Nozomi, Clarity, and everybody else that's in the marketplace, right? It can't just be a vendor specific effort. It needs to be a whole of community approach. And Daryl, we're going to pivot over to Q&A in just a second, so I'll pass the mic to you for just a real brief comment. Over.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. I'd love to be part of that. We've had kind of starts of a little bit of those. We've had some 1 or 2 day conferences to where we'd have that, but I think a permanent body would be fantastic and really be able to advance this. As was mentioned earlier, I mean, right now the installation folks have a framework, it's an unclassified framework on how to conduct your own cybersecurity exercise, if you will. You can, and they also go through these energy resilience exercises. You're going to unplug the power and see, how resilient you are. These engineers and mission assurance folks should be doing the same thing from a cyber perspective, and they should be coordinating with the commercial and industry partners that support them on the base.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Thanks for that. I'm going to pivot over to the Q&As. So we do have the Q&A button down at the bottom of your Zoom screen or at the top, depending on how you have things configured. feel free to drop that, to drop your questions into that. And I do see a couple of questions that are popping up in chat. I'll try to grab those as well. So Paul asked, my biggest concern is in securing the electrical grid. What provisions in the NDAA help support the DOE and industry at large to protect energy? And so I'll start on that one. I'll pass the mic over to our participants. I think the great thing with the energy sector is that the community is extraordinarily engaged on the cybersecurity front right now. Energy is largely more mature than a lot of the other spaces when it comes to cyber. And DOE, we call that DOE, has been doing some really great things in fostering innovation in that environment. Rob, our CEO, likes to say that the energy grid may not be, or the energy systems may not be as secure as we would like them, but the energy grid in the United States in particular is extraordinarily resilient. And so I think that, when we talk about concerns around there, I think we need to remember not just the security aspect, but also the resiliency aspect. Daryl, Dave, do you have any comments around there?
Yeah, I agree that generally they do offer that, and I think the onus really is on the services to make those connections. The NDAAs can specify really developing resources toward protecting any one industry. There's no real limit to that. I do recommend that if you think that there is a certain problem that just hasn't had attention, that you work with your industry partners and you work with the members of Congress to determine what might be the most relevant NDAA language for next year. And there's opportunities to do that, and that schedule is normally you need to complete that by the end of August for the next year's language.
Awesome, thanks, Daryl. So we have another question that a lot of our comments seem to mean that point solutions are less attractive than platform solutions, right? What's the direction of the DoD here, and what are our thoughts around there? Dave, you want to lead off on that one?
Yeah, I think that, and that's a good observation. I think that what we're advocating here in this conversation and our interpretation is coordination and integration where it makes sense. We're not advocating for one-off buying because it frankly limits our ability to take a defense in-depth approach to network security. We really want to look at it as our best ability to help asset owners procure the right solutions so that they can maximize their return on investment. They can maximize the scale at which they can secure in terms of endpoints, points, installations, depots, you name it. And there's a trap out there that if you try to rush to the solution, and you're limiting yourself. And what we advocate, and this is done through partnership, industry partnership, academic partnership, national labs, an integrated approach, a system integration, so that, you do have an enterprise look at your network so you're able to meet your mission now, but prepare yourself for what's to come. And at the end of the day, we think that's the best investment with the resources that you have. So that probably is consistent with some of your takeaways are probably accurate. Every organization is different, but we think that a holistic approach is going to be the best in the long run.
Yeah, so I think we should be. Oops, sorry, Daryl. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, I was going to say that when we're looking at solutions and we're looking also at maturity, right? I think that we should be looking for solutions that can accomplish multiple requirements where it's appropriate. But from a maturity standpoint, we in the department may be at the point where evaluating point solutions and figuring out how they apply to aspects of the framework that has been developed and that'll be released. I think that that's kind of from a maturity standpoint where a lot of folks are sitting, to be quite honest.
Yeah, so I would look at it kind of in 3 ways. So first, and a lot of times with government folks, they want to figure out how we can solve this on our own. And I think it took longer than it should have, but we realized that us creating a government-only tool and solution was not going to work. there are, and then we kind of saw it from this perspective as well. Some installations, they'll have 25 or more vendors providing different solutions for the utility systems across, the installation. That also is not a great long-term sustainment, fiscally responsible plan. Yes, great innovation, great contracts, however, not good for the government. And I know that there's one service in particular had a program to narrow, one base 25 down to 5, and it's forcing the vendors to work together on combining capabilities. And so this framework, as the Mosaics framework enabled, is if you have one vendor that does all 7 functions, then that's great, and you have a good relationship, and you can submit that for funding, and if it meets all the zero trust requirements, then good to go. But you may have already have contractor relations with 2 or 3, and so now you look for others to fill these other gaps. So it's really is totally up to what is going to be best for the unique situation. I did want to address one other. I saw a number of folks in there asking the question, and I did want to just go ahead and put the rumors to rest. But yes, I am talking with Netflix on a superhero control systems series. More to follow at a later date.
I love it. I love it. There's a question from Javier Lopez. How do we address cybersecurity supply chain risk management with OT equipment while also maintaining TAA compliancy? That is a really great question, I think. I was talking to Rob about this the other day. Yeah, when we look at an incident happening, right? Worst case is a destructive incident, obviously. There's definitely components that we may not be able to manufacture here in the United States today, right now. What do you think the Defense Department, Daryl, should be doing to help kind of foster and capture those requirements?
Well, I think we need to determine which one of those critical components need to be either reviewed or examined before redeployed, or we need to come up with a way to make them here. I mean, we've kind of toyed with this from the chip aspect, right? We really need to make our own, and now we've got a 2030 plan to kind of get that going. But we can address if we know what is part of the systems that we're using. And we've talked about the software, hardware, bill of materials. We're making that a requirement for the IT side. Again, it goes down to how we're identifying and tracking and maintaining and sustaining all these things with the control systems. We really just need to make control systems a mainstream thinking of how we are handling all this, and not just a complete one-off, somebody else does that. And we'll be able to focus on which ones we need to really secure and make here.
So one thing I want to point out, and then I'm going to pivot over to a couple of questions around resourcing that have been dropped in. It is important to not get hung up in analysis by paralysis or requirements by paralysis. There are things that we need to do today to start addressing visibility and protection of our control systems. We've got the requirements that have now been, evaluated, that will be released in the DoD CIO reference architecture. We need to start really getting after things. We really do, given the current threat landscape and adversary capabilities. So there were questions, a lot of questions were tied into resourcing, both around, kind of modernization, which I think is a really important topic, as well as how do we help, get people the funds to actually get about this? And I'm going to make a first comment, and then I'll pass this over to both Dave and Daryl, because I think that us as a community have had, from multiple perspectives, experience trying to help shape this. OT is what makes missions function. And I think that is a pathway to help ensuring that we're appropriately resourcing operational technology, is to help the mission owner, right? The folks who own the O plans, who own the combat focused mission sets, to help make them aware that their line of business, right? Same way as industry. Industry looks at it as a revenue generating line of business. We've got to look at OT as our force projection and warfighting line of business. And if we start talking to people in that sense, I think people will start understanding that we need to put a little bit more focus on resources, because the resources are there. There's a lot of dollars that have been dropped and kind of focused and targeted in the omnibus bill towards control system cybersecurity. Also super exciting. It's up to us in the community to help educate people so that they know to start reaching out for those. Daryl?
So I think the focus needs to be on resilience and understanding the resilience of these systems to affect your bottom line or your mission. I would recommend you need to do tabletop exercises minimum, but you need to make the folks aware that you cannot operate without these things. I find it very interesting to ask folks, who here has used power today, right? Who here has used water? And typically that's 100%. Maybe some of the folks who are attending the webinar didn't use either, and they don't need to worry about their camera being on, right? Anyway, but to really get to understand that they cannot project power without these. They can't run their artificial intelligence or their machine learning tools, which they want to have for big data platform and data lakes to make these decisions without these utility systems. And really got to help leadership make some decisions on, if we're going to invest in here, what things we should probably divest in. Just don't come to a table and say, I need $100 million. Do some research and try and get some folks in there to say, we need to look at doing this and start divesting from here. That's really tough. But the easy win, I think, is regular tabletop resilience, as live fire as possible exercises on what happens when you lose these systems.
Sure. So I'm going to address one final question, and then we'll give everybody a chance for one final thought before we close this down. Somebody dropped in the chat box asking, if Dragos will be, kind of engaging the government from a partnership perspective, right? We already do. We've got a great relationship going on with the National Security Agency through our Neighborhood Keeper program. That department of that a few other federal government entities are also supporting. That's something that we don't make anybody pay for, right? It's something that we do for the good of the community. When you talk about the potential of approaching Dragos from a hey, we'd love to learn what you guys are doing. All you got to do is ask. We really are here for the community, and we want to share. We want to help build and foster those partnerships. And folks, like us, and also the other folks in the vendor community, right? Like, let's not be vendor specific, because there's lots of folks doing great work out and about. There's opportunities to leverage those organizations to build partnerships. And so I'll pass the mic over to Daryl. Daryl, if you were to foot stop anything for anybody about the NDAA and where people should be focused, what would your one thing be?
Well, a couple things. Again, I wanted to echo what you were just saying. Not only is it great to see industry folks focusing on this and helping the government, but also companies like Booz Allen Hamilton. They have dedicated folks to focus on this area, and not everybody's doing that. But the wave is coming, because people see it's something that needs to get done, and obviously potential business. So I think just the key takeaways are, Congress is asking the Department of Defense to show me the money. Show me where you stand on protecting your most critical assets, and with the progress you're making and how much money you're investing in securing those systems that are required to enable your mission. So I think everyone can take that to their own organization and just do a little calculating on, how am I doing, where am I investing, and what should I need to do, and who can I turn to for that. And I think these webinar series are a great way to enable that.
Thanks. Dave?
Yeah, Chuck, thanks. I'm gonna just adjust my foot stump a little bit. First thing I'm going to say is there is actions that can be taken now in the organization. So, inaction is not an option. Starting someplace today with whatever level of resources you have is pretty important to get the path forward. The second thing I'm going to say is you make the case by tying it to the mission. This is the last question that Chuck asked, but when you go on an installation, of which it's fortunate that we can get back to them now and see clients and so on, look around. It's buildings and it's infrastructure and it's gates and it's utilities, but it's weapons systems and platforms and physical systems and airfields and so on. The OT connection to the mission platforms that reside on these installations and infrastructure can make or break our ability to respond. So getting resources, making the case ties to the mission and what's at stake around OT cybersecurity. So Chuck, really appreciate Dragos and the chance to participate in this today. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, my foot stop is really the partnership piece, right? There's folks that have been doing this for a while successfully at scale in some of the largest companies in the world. And not just in one single critical infrastructure sector. There's folks that have been successful in doing this in manufacturing, in energy, in water, in building management systems, across the board. We've got to pull those folks in. We've got to capture that institutional knowledge that already exists within our country and within the National Guard and Reserves. It's a great asset. Folks that are working in these environments every day, right? That is largely untapped. And so we shouldn't try to reinvent the wheel. We should really take what works from industry and then copy pasta over where it applies. So again, I'd like to thank everybody for joining. I know we went long, but everybody was sticking around. So really appreciate the great conversation. I'll close this out just to mention that we will have our second federal webinar in April. It'll be focused on OT cybersecurity workforce development, which again, I think is a really important topic. You have all the technology in the world, but if you don't have the people to actually operate and maintain the technology, it's not going to work for very long for you. So look forward to having everybody. And if anybody ever needs anything, feel free to reach out to myself and to others. LinkedIn, email, no matter what role. We're here for the community, and we're excited to be supporting the department on this journey as a team. So thanks everybody for coming, and we'll see you guys next time.